According to U.S. federal law, human trafficking is defined as sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained the age of 18 years old.
Not only is human sex trafficking slavery, but it is a big business. It is the fastest growing business of organized crime and the third largest criminal enterprise in the world.
Holly Austin Smith was 14 years old when she became a victim of sex trafficking. She was only trafficked for a few nights until an officer noticed she was underage. The year was 1972, and back then there was no aftercare taken for victims of sex trafficking. Her pimp only served a year in jail for rape and luring the child into the sex trafficking ring. At the age of 12, Barbara Amaya ran away from an abusive home. A couple took her in, and it didn't take long for that couple to submerge her into the sex trafficking trade. Soon after, they sold her. Under the care of her new pimp, Moses, she was shot, stabbed, raped, kidnapped, trafficked, beaten, jailed, and more, all before she was 18. Soon after all of this occurred, she became addicted to drugs, and her pimp released her into the streets of New York.
There has been a recent trend of female college students in Russia and Ukraine working in foreign countries as prostitutes during summer breaks. The young women are somewhere in Asia, Europe, or the Middle East, having been duped into leaving their countries under the promise of legitimate work, only to be locked into contracts that immediately place them in debt. They are working as prostitutes to pay back their so-called employers and regain their freedom.
Polaroid has a four-tier rating system, Tier 1 being the highest rating and Tier 4 being the lowest rating. Number 3, Delaware, does have sex and labor trafficking provisions, some investigative tools, and they make it a bit easier to convict criminals who have sex trafficked minors, but the state lacks any other substantial safeguards to fight trafficking. Number 2, New Hampshire, the last of the Tier 3 states, has the second lowest score in the whole country with just 3 points. Number 1, South Dakota, the only state in the most critical category, Tier 4. South Dakota comes in dead last as the number 1 worst state for the fight to end human trafficking.
Tima was a victim of sex trafficking at the age of 19. Lured to Canada from her native Hungary with the promise of a nannying job and an exciting future in a new country. She was met at the airport by traffickers, trapped and forced to live in a motel as a sex slave. Studies show that racial and ethnic women are more likely to be exposed to trafficking due to structural poverty and marginalization. An estimated 293,000 American youths currently are at risk of becoming victims of commercial sexual exploitation. The majority of these victims are runaway or thrown away youth who live on the streets and become victims of prostitution. The average age at which girls first become victims of prostitution is 12 to 14. It is not only the girls on the streets who are affected. Boys and transgender youth enter into prostitution between the ages of 11 and 13 on average. To get help from the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, call 1-888-373-7888.